and welcome to IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow. You're watching this brand new edition, season 11 with me, Sunanda Jayaseelan. Today, we're talking about the big ideas for a new India, and I'm doing a deep dive into the FMCG space with none other than Saugata Gupta of Marico to talk about the importance of branding, marketing, the big ideas behind that, the big disruption when it comes to having a wide range of products like the ones that you see here behind me. We're also talking about the importance of digital and technology for India's small businesses. Listen.
As consumers return to their daily routines, the FMCG industry in India continues to recover. Being the fourth largest industry in India and employing over 3 million people, this sector has been a strong pillar for the economy over the years. The market had projected a fair growth of 8 to 9% in 2020, and then COVID-19 struck. The outbreak can be seen as a major technological and learning event. As much as it increased the retail sector's dependence on technology and digital systems to continue business as usual, it also imparted some lessons for the FMCG sector. Joining us today is Saugata Gupta, MD and CEO of Marico, who explains how manufacturers and retailers must keep an eye on changing consumer preferences and manage their portfolios accordingly.
Saugata, so good having you and meeting you in person after having spoken so much, down the line, and catching you at the busiest part of the year and the day. But so good of you to join us in the Leaders of Tomorrow.
My pleasure.
And congratulations, you're going to complete almost a decade at Marico, and we've just launched our 11th season of Leaders of Tomorrow and doing a deep dive, of course, into the FMCG space. My first question to you, Saugata, what makes Marico Marico? You're someone who's come in and grown the business to where it is at. What would you say is that USP which has helped you grow the way you have in a market that's constantly changing?
I think 2-3 things. Firstly, I think if you look at Marico, it is a unique culture and a culture based on a founder's mentality, owner's mindset. And as we have scaled up, normally what happens is our journey is from what I call a very entrepreneurial small company into a scaled insurgent. And therefore, we have been able to ensure whether it's agility, whether it's speed, whether it's empowerment in driving business results and growth. The second thing is our focus. If you look at our portfolio, in 95 to 96%, we are either number one or number two. So we don't enter a category just to play, but to play to win. And therefore, that leads to a far more sustainable results in the business.
So the central theme that we're working with for our 11th edition is Ideas for New India. And I want to break down the Ideas for New India when it comes to FMCG. And let's start with distribution disruption. The way companies like yourself are selling, the way small businesses are selling has completely changed. We will talk about innovation in digital and technology in just a bit. But how has the way businesses distribute what they do, the strength really of the distribution network, is it changing? How is it changing? What do you want to tell our entrepreneurs?
I think 2 things. I think firstly, obviously, the market structure has changed with the growth of omnichannel today. Yeah. I think the traditional distribution system is undergoing a significant transformation. And that's because of both business model and the investment and the rapid change in technology that is happening. For example, just to give you an example, the old traditional distribution system of one person going and taking an order from an outlet. I see in a couple of years from now is the retailer operating an app, somebody downloading an order based on replenishment model, and a professional logistics company delivering the thing. Also the fact that today there is choices, and therefore you can buy, there's a cash and carry, there's a B2B. Having said that, all these new business models someday has to deliver profitability. Having said that, India is still a very large country, and therefore traditional distribution or general trade will continue to be very important. It's just that they are reinventing themselves today so that they become relevant for tomorrow. But I see distribution as one area where both investment in technology and business model and the growth in other new channels, which is organized trade, e-commerce, undergoing a significant transformation, and that will help large companies who invest ahead of the curve.
Another thing that we're seeing a change in is Value disruption. Help us understand what that means for the FMCG space and how businesses like yours are leading that.
So if you look at India, it's a large country where I think as per capita consumption, income grows, people become aspirational for great brands. Having said that, what is very, very critical for India is affordability and availability, because there's a huge, mass of rural consumers who want to improve this one in life, the quality of living, going for large brands, going for quality. In food, it is far more, say, hygiene and convenience, the movement from unbranded to packaged food. In the case of personal care, I think it's a question of increasing penetration. And we have seen this, for example, the shampoo sachet revolution. We have seen a similar thing in the entire mobile phone growth, because of the cost of data and calls is one of the lowest in the world. We have seen the same thing in how travel, air travel has increased. As privatization has happened, costs have come down. So if you look at a lot of innovation in India has to be a format innovation, which ensures that I get the same benefit at a far lower outlay, because outlay in terms of this one is extremely important thing, price points. And that's why in India, if you see, the 1 rupee, 5 rupee, 10 rupee price points continues to reign supreme. Now with inflation, it is extremely important that there is value disruption and innovation such that we continue to provide to the consumers those price points. At the same time, I think taking into account that we also deliver margins.
Okay. So you're saying that India will continue to be a very price sensitive market.
It will be a price sensitive market, but the significant disruption will be in formats and packaging to offer that value to the consumer. Because, and I think a lot of Indian companies have done tremendous amount of value disruption.
You were saying food, so I just want to come back to that. Food has become a very important category. You also announced that a large focus of yours is going to be as far as food is concerned. What are we talking about when we say food? What sort of categories can you break it down for us?
So I think India packaged food penetration is extremely low. And obviously one of the biggest thrusts that has happened during COVID was a lot of in-home consumption that happened, and therefore packaged foods especially grew significantly. The second set of growth that is happening is, I think India wants to, a lot of Indians, especially in urban, wants to eat healthy. And we are extremely grateful to the government for driving a lot of Indian food grains. I think this is the International Year of the Millet. Millet is something which is homegrown in India.
We heard from the finance minister as well.
And we are the largest producer of millets in the world. It is extremely healthy, and companies like us, especially with the fact that we have a brand, a health brand, Saffola, which is actually doing a great work in expanding the total addressable market and getting into food which is better for you. And therefore we believe that health or better for you foods will be a big driver of growth in the future as far as Marico is concerned. And of course in India we have to promote, instead of importing stuff, promote our own grains.
Sure. I have a couple of questions based on that. First and foremost is the fact that, when you're saying packaged foods and, healthy foods, etc., are you largely talking about an urban audience that understands this and is willing to perhaps pay those kind of prices for it?
I think the initial growth in foods will be urban. Having said that, I believe that there are of course mass categories. If you look at noodles, biscuits and other things, there are mass categories which penetrated rural also equally well. As far as Saffola is concerned, however, having said that, I think it is still an urban brand, and therefore our initial growth will be a little more urban centric.
Sure. The second question based on that is, you're seeing so much now by way of products which are coming out in the wellness and health category, right? You have Ayurveda products, you have many others that are coming out. For an entrepreneur who's watching this interview, first and foremost, can you call out perhaps where you feel the major disruption is going to happen? What are we talking about when we're saying health foods or the wellness category? Because research showing that the market is growing by, and correct me if I'm wrong, nearly 20% CAGR. It's at about 30 odd billion as we speak. How is that going to change, and where is that going to change? Because health and wellness becomes a very huge category.
I think two things. First, we need to ensure that whatever we are launching, in terms of delivers, in terms of efficacy, and it's differentiated. Secondly, we need to understand what are the need gaps in the market. Now, coming to, and also when you deliver things on health, we need to ensure that it doesn't change the consumer habits considerably.
So it doesn't change.
Yeah, because see, consumers, especially when it comes to food, to give you an example, see, oats is a very Western habit. It expanded only when we converted oats into a masala oats, made it into, Indians don't like cold breakfast, for example, made it into a savory product which is then eaten anytime during the day as a snack.
Okay.
So I think we have to convert habits. So, and that's the reason, for example, a lot of Western healthy habits haven't grown in India. We have to ensure that we need to convert them into something which is, and therefore in food, for example, and I think the biggest insight in food when you entered the healthy food is that Indians are unwilling to compromise on taste for health, and therefore it becomes a very big challenge that how do you deliver that entire taste while also delivering health. And I think so that's another example. For example, we have just launched recently ragi chips.
Okay.
And we're just test marketing it in some markets, ragi chips. And ragi chips is a wonderful example of this, because this is an Indian concept of millets. We're giving it in a chip format, but then there is the Indian masala, which is being delivered.
Is that very specific to the Indian market, that insight?
I think it's pretty specific to the Asian markets, and that's why if you notice, I think food habits are pretty ingrained, and it's very difficult to change food habits. If you look at globally, personal care habits are extremely globalized, but food habits are far more localized.
Okay. We'll slip into a short commercial break on that note. There's much more on the other side. Do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment. Welcome back. You're with us here on IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. Tonight, we're talking about the big ideas for a new India from the FMCG space. I was reading an interesting insight that, when you were looking at Saffola oats, you also had to talk about health and health information to be able to also drive that category. Will that become more and more important because consumers themselves are becoming more knowledgeable? I think COVID to a large extent has really driven this focus towards health and healthy food and working out, etc. Will that become more important?
Absolutely. I think today's consumer, when he or she makes a purchase decision, it's based on a lot of information, and therefore it has changed the way marketing is done. And therefore, focus on content, and that's why I think influencers, they have, I think the importance of them has increased manifold.
Sure.
And the other interesting thing with the growth of online and modern trade, today consumers look at the packaging, they spend time before making those, so they make a far more informed choice. It is not about the old ways where a retailer is to push something and you make that choice.
Yeah.
And therefore the entire shopper behavior and the purchase decision has changed. And also other interesting thing that has happened, you might get information from one channel and you might buy from another channel. For example, I'm buying a mobile phone or electronics, or even an FMCG. I might go to my neighborhood shop, see it physically, but then I'm getting a better price in some other place and I'm buying it.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily, so the consumer purchase decision has become far more complicated today.
Sure. The fourth disruption that I quickly also want for you to call out, I'd love for you to call out, is disruption in technology and digital. It's become a huge part of our lives when it comes to selling. But for entrepreneurs who are looking at the FMCG space, what insights can you give us?
I think the biggest thing is about there has been technology disruption. See, when we talk digital and we talk about digital transformation, everybody talks only about digital marketing.
Yeah.
It's just not about digital marketing. I think the way you engage with the consumer, I think the biggest insights today trends come from social listening, for example.
Okay.
Also, it's about analytics. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity to use data science and analytics to drive spend effectiveness. There's also the role of the entire way you decide innovation, you decide even things in HR, for example. So I think the influence of digital automation and analytics is across the entire value chain of the organization. We just have a new factory which we started off in 2020. The entire factory, I think the way we have leveraged automation is, I think, best in class. So to me, the digital automation is just not in FMCG about marketing and consumer, it's right across. And therefore it is extremely important that I think the first thing is that the leadership has a high, what I call a digital quotient, and only then they are able to influence, DQ, that how do you want to influence and drive that change. And one of the interesting things we did, in the leadership, we had started a process called reverse mentoring, where we had 20s, the youngsters who are really digitally savvy, personally mentoring me and my team.
Amazing. I was just going to ask you, how does the leader of a company which is so large do social listening, like you were saying?
I think because digital, I think any change or any transformation has to come from the top. And therefore, so is culture. If you want to do, we want to do change in culture in the organization, it has to come from the top. And therefore, what was important that you have a top management and is digitally savvy. And unlike startups, while we are a very young organization, it's still a little more older, compared to some of the startups, the average age of the top team. Having said that, I think that if you have learning agility, and I think it's a very important characteristic of a great leader, having a learning agility so that you are ahead of the curve always. I think only leadership who have learning agility are able to adapt digital much more quicker.
Okay, my last few questions, I do know you're pressed for time. First and foremost, some of the announcements that we've heard from the finance minister specific to your space. One is we've seen the accelerator for agri and agri-tech startups. We've seen an increased focus on military. Spoke about that very briefly, but also just the focus on the agri space. Were you excited hearing some of these announcements? What sort of impact is it going to have on FMCG in the long run?
See, if you look at FMCG generally, I think FMCG thrives when there is economic growth, and FMCG thrives when there is inclusive economic growth because it's items of mass consumption. And number two, FMCG thrives when there is low food inflation, because what happens is that whenever there is high food inflation, consumers tend to titrate on FMCG or downgrade on FMCG. So I think the two good things that is, I think, obviously this has been a fantastic budget, I believe, and it's been an extremely progressive budget which looks at the long term. It has resisted the temptation from being populist, and therefore I think two things. One, I think given all the tinkering that has happened on the tax structures, it will give more money in the hands, disposable income hands of consumers, which is good for FMCG. The continued focus on infrastructure, both in urban and rural, creates more employment, which generates more income, and therefore has a trickle-down effect on FMCG. And thirdly, I think in the last few years, the government focus in terms of driving manufacturing. And I think it's extremely important, the fact that all companies today, multinationals, are looking at a China plus one kind of a policy, that I think a lot of manufacturing is coming to, which is also creating employment. Because generating employment is one of the biggest drivers of growth. It is not about just giving subsidies and all, but of actually generating employment, given the demographic dividend we have in this country. And therefore, all this is going to be helpful for FMCG. Yes, I am aware that this year it has been a little rough year, especially in rural. But I think we are seeing some green shoots of some change in consumption that is happening right now.
Okay. The economic survey did paint somewhat of concern as far as inflation goes. Any comments on that?
See, I think obviously there is a global, economic issue, and India is a standout country. Having said that, if there is no significant black swan events in the political space
just
globally,
had one, we're hoping,
I'm talking of global this one.
Politics,
I think we are in a much better space, and we will continue to be in a space. At the end of the day, we are we are a domestic consumption-driven economy, and the fact that, of course, we are now investing in manufacturing for exports. Number two, I think with the opening up of China, that's also somewhere good news for the world economy.
Sure.
So I would think that if inflation is under control and fiscal deficit is under control, and with the buoyancy in tax collection that was there in the last 2 years, where the actuals beat the estimates, we believe we are in a reasonably good space.
Mr. Harsh Mariwala in his latest book has this very interesting anecdote, which I'm hoping to discuss with you. And he says, globally, it's just about 1 out of 10 FMCG companies that see any sort of success. Your advice for an entrepreneur as we're winding down today's interview about what determines success in India today? What would you say?
I think firstly, you need to have an offering or a solution which is differentiated, and at least it could be in terms of providing. See, ultimately we are there in the business of providing consumer value at the lowest possible cost, because consumer, and therefore I think the offering has to be differentiated. Secondly, I think it has to have an addressable market which has scale, because that only is important. And thirdly, I think what is, people underestimate the value of execution excellence. See, at the end of the day, you might get into something which, you're entering a market which is attractive. It's not about just the attractive market, it's about having a right to win. And the right to win happens when you develop your capabilities and ultimately deliver execution excellence. And lastly, I would say is that I think if you really look at FMCG as a sector, and that's one of the reasons, if you look at FMCG is the only sector, if you look at brands transcend centuries. So you have to invest behind innovation, you have to invest behind generating what I call consumer belonging, and set up a repeatable model to do that. It is not a sector where you will get every 5 years some huge technology disruption. It is about a very long term, creating bond with the consumers. And never get complacent. So I think 2 things we follow for all our master brands, of course, is that never get greedy in terms of making what I call unsustainable margins of pricing, because the consumer wants value, and continuously innovate to stay ahead of the game, because if you don't innovate, somebody else will do it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Sure. That was a deep dive into the FMCG space. We're going to continue putting the focus on different industries to bring you the big ideas for a new India. For tonight, it's a wrap. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good night.